Hello, and welcome to Rogue Artisans and Crafters. We welcome you, our viewer, to our show where we feature local artists and craftspeople from within Southern Oregon. With our show, we like to talk to our featured artists about how they came to their art, what drives them as artists, find out stories behind their art process, and how their work as artists influences their lives. Today, we have the privilege of featuring local artist Betty LaDuke, who has an international reputation for her multicultural themed art. Betty's life and work as an artist is long and she is well traveled, and with such an extensive career, it cannot really be told in a single episode. So we'll be interviewing Betty in a two-part show. You, the viewer, will be sure to look for the second part of our interview with Betty to learn her full art story. And I'm pleased to be able to introduce Betty LaDuke and her work to our audience. And so Betty, welcome to the show.
Hi, and thank you so much. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, I want to tell the audience to begin with that I was a student of yours back when I first started college, back in like 82, 83, and you were like one of the first art classes, your drawing class was one of the first art classes I had. And at the time, I was recovering from a second brain surgery when I was a senior in high school, and I started college 2 weeks after that second brain surgery. So your art class was like one of the first art classes I took, and it was a way for me to kind of recover from all the other regular classes I was taking. So in a way, I really never really got to know you then because I was really kind of hiding out in the art classes just as a way of recovery from my surgery.
Thank you.
So I find it wonderful to be able now to have you on my show.
To confess, you're confessing.
Yeah, and to be able to really get to know you now when I couldn't back then. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to interview for the show. And currently you're pretty busy because you've got a couple of exhibitions going on right now locally. You've got an exhibition at Schneider Museum of Art, and you've got an exhibition at Hanson Howard Gallery here in Ashland as well.
I do.
Yeah, so from what I can tell, your exhibition at Hanson Howard's going on till the end of the month?
That's right.
Right? And
it's called Diversity.
Okay. And the Schneider Museum exhibition is going on
till March 17th,
yeah.
And it's social justice continued.
Yeah, and those are extremely strong themes throughout all your art and your life from what I've been able to learn of you. And plus, you have a permanent exhibition at the Medford Airport.
Yay!
Yeah,
I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, it's an incredible display that you have on permanent display there. So,
it says celebrating local farms and farm workers, and
yeah.
I think it's quite wonderful that we have it in the Valley.
Yeah, and I happen to have, we have a short little video clip of your Schneider Art exhibition reception. So if you guys in the control room could bring that up, and it'll just kind of gives a feel for how big of a reception you had, because you had a pretty good turnout.
I was one of 4 artists, so there were 4 of us exhibiting, so I can't take all the credit.
Well, still, it was a good turnout, and it's a nice exhibition that you have.
Right.
Yeah.
It spans 5 decades, from 1968 to 2018. So we have the troubled periods.
Right.
And what was old, and what is new, and what doesn't seem to change.
Yeah. So do we have that reception video? So that was a pretty good turnout. In fact, I know rock bands that would love to have that kind of a reception, and they don't. So in a way, that kind of makes you like a rock star artist.
Oh, about that.
Okay, for that kind of reception. So that was really cool.
Yeah. Also, there were some timely pieces there about the DACA dreamers. There were some pertinent political issues that my exhibit was covering.
Yeah.
And I'm really pleased because it's timely to make people aware how artists can respond to social issues. And it's in a symbolic format, but just to get people thinking.
Yeah. Well, you do a lot of focus on social issues. You're focused on farmers and craftspeople and tradespeople, and their life and their work that they. I mean, you really, that is an incredible thing to see how you capture that activity. So how did you begin your life? I mean, and
As an artist?
as an artist. I mean, because from my understanding, you started pretty young. You figured out pretty young that you wanted to be an artist.
I did. And the sketchpad was always my way. So it was a suggestion from a teacher in my high school of Music and Art in New York, where I grew up, that we use sketchbooks in our community to bring back subject matter for watercolor paintings. And it stayed with me ever since. So I can take the sketchbook almost anywhere and feel comfortable. And people seem to connect with that because they can watch you. You don't get too nervous. After a while, you get used to it.
Right.
And they're part of the whole, process with you in a way.
Well, I know we have some slides of kind of relating to your early life as an artist, and if the control room could bring up those. Now these are your parents, right? In these
That's right.
in these early sketches.
That's right.
Yeah. So let's kind of go through these images, and Betty can talk a little bit about what they all represent.
Those are markets in New York City. That was an early theme, this whole theme of food and not so much the preparation, but vendors. I love the
Right.
vendors and the diversity.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to the next.
My teachers, I was lucky to go to a summer camp that was interracial and co-ed.
Right.
And Elizabeth Catlett and Charles White, husband and wife, were the art counselors there. So at a young age, it was just amazing to know people like them.
Yeah.
And the fact that they had traveled and been to Mexico, and it gave me something to reach for, a goal.
Right.
So I did end up in Mexico
Yeah.
with a scholarship for 3.5 years to
Right.
study and to paint.
Okay. So let's go on to the next. And that's an early picture of you.
My first art exhibit,
Yeah.
Cleveland, Ohio,
Okay.
Caramoo House, an African American cultural center, while I was going to the Cleveland Art Institute.
Yeah.
So the subjects were people, neighborhood folks that did all kinds of work. So I sketched them in a big pad with charcoal, and there they are.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go on to the next.
Some individual portraits
Yeah.
from that time period.
Right, okay. And go on to the next.
Mexico, finally, a scholarship got me there, and I lived there for 3.5 years. So I started out in San Miguel, but lived in Guanajuato for a year, and then worked with indigenous people in another region of Mexico.
Okay. And let's go on to the next.
So you can see my early paintings. The paintings changed later on stylistically, but always people. That was the fundamental basis of what I cared about.
Right. And go on to the next.
And here I am in an indigenous community where people still speak their Otomi language, not Spanish. And I'm working there actually as a mural painter, so that's a big story. But the people are just connecting with the environment, surviving barely because it never rains there. And I learned so much about community and survival.
Okay. And let's go on to the next.
And that's where I did my first mural, in the patio wall of this one-room schoolhouse. And the teacher, where I stayed with her in a room that was attached to the school. So it was quite a learning experience. It was pre-Peace Corps days. I couldn't have had a better education.
Right. And is there another one? Yeah, there we go.
And learning about the Maguey, the staff of life, and the very most wonderful photo I've ever taken, and that's the boy and the bird cage. And if you wonder where the bird comes from, now you know.
Yeah, all righty. Well, we happen to have a short video that actually kind of tells your story at the local level in terms of your local art work, and that is a video called Paintbrush harvest?
That's right.
Right. So let's bring that video up. That will run for a few minutes, and then we'll come back and continue to talk to Betty.
I'm an artist with pen and sketchbook for shovel and earth. My seeds are the sketches I create of agricultural workers at farms, orchards, and vineyards as they plow, prune, weed, or harvest our food. From field to studio, the sketches are the roots of my artwork that gradually evolve in the form of shaped, routed, and painted wooden panels. These 4 or 5 foot tall mural panels become the workers, men and women, bending, stooping, or stretching to harvest our food. I am grateful for my community's support of public art that honors these workers by making their contributions visible.
Betty first came out to our fields in 2010. I was excited that she would actually want to come out and see what we did.
This is when I began to look at people harvesting green beans. My first wood panel that I did that's now in the airport.
What Betty does nourishes the rest of the senses. I mean, the colors, the beauty of her artwork, the sensual parts of, people picking flowers and fruit and vegetables. How can that be romantic? But you look at her artwork and it's the essence of human life.
Oh, I love this strawberry one. Isn't that a panel?
It's another panel, yeah, and that's, I think, could be Senor Raul bending over with the buckets attached to his belt.
When I came to the United States, that was in 1978. I was working most of the time in the strawberry fields.
Senor Raul's been working for Fry Family Farm for many, many, many years, and the strawberry harvest is how I first met him. And when I first sketched him, I was surprised at how the buckets are attached to the belt. And sometimes they have a bucket on each side. And they fill the buckets with the strawberries. And just the body shape, that movement, the weight of the filled bucket coming, pulling, tugging on your waist, and the continual bending. And that's what I was trying to capture here.
Dos gotitas de agua clara.
What I've loved about Betty coming to our field is that, for one thing, she's outside eyes.
Sometimes we need to feed our spirits, and flowers do that for me. Just the shapes, the form, the color. And I never realized what I enjoy on my kitchen table, how it's harvested, how it grows in the field, and the women, mostly women, who do the flower harvesting, and the care with which they have to do the work, and the bundling of the flowers, and the carefully bringing them to buckets of water so that they can then be carried and processed further before they're brought to the flower stores or to the farmer's market or the co-op.
You can eat and you can have flowers on your table, but you can't pick flowers if you don't have field workers. Someone has to till, someone has to plant, someone has to weed, someone has to water, someone has to be there every day to make 10 acres of flowers productive. And when I look at the art that Betty has done of our farms, I see Sylvia, I see Chelly, I see Beth, I see Susie, I see Mr. Raul, I see Alex, I see Chevo, and then I realize those are all the people I work with.
When I came up here, very abruptly had the managing of our vineyards thrown on me. I didn't know anything at all about anything to do with grapes. I turned to my crews.
Vuelven a subir los alambres arriba.
I really wanted to do some work with women, and I asked Oscar because he was like the supervisor, and he steered me toward this woman, and she was lovely, but she didn't have a hat on, and most of the workers did. So he graciously took, Oscar did, his hat and put it on Marlon's head. And Marlon kept working, so I was able to do this lovely sketch of her and the rhythm of the hat as it shaded her face and so on. Later, I learned that was Oscar's daughter, and did the panel of Marlon, and it's one of my favorite panels, just the gesture of her body, the movement, the softness of her body, and the roundness, and then also the work, just working as hard as any of the men. Esto no, pero esto es para usted.
Yeah. Yes, es Marlene. Yeah.
When I came to see the grape harvest, it was interesting to capture a sense of a group of them, the motion, the rhythm of the workers against the vineyards, against the vines, against the grapes, and how it all integrated into one large motion. And the buckets that needed to be filled, and the rapidness with which they were working. Because the workers get paid by the bucket. So they work fast, they work very carefully, because they can't ruin, bruise the grapes. It's the grape harvest frenzy. It's kind of fun to show a panel that's finished, just to take a look at the textures and the surface and the build-up, and I kind of like that. That's the part that's really fun, and the reason why I go to the trouble of routing and and having Barney Johnson do the routing. I want to get sort of the spirit of it, my interaction and reaction to the men working. And they have a real tenderness with the plants, with what they're doing, and a great deal of patience, and kind of a flow of energy and an interplay of the people working, the vegetation, the kale in this case, and the playfulness of the forms themselves. My designs are a real challenge for Barney because they're never the same. Each panel is quite unique, and he's going in different depths, and that's a lot of work for him, and he does it really well. Many, many hands, many workers make everything grow and be beautiful and harvestable and nourishable. Nothing happens without many, many hands touching, connecting with the trees, with the fruit, with the berries, with the flowers. It's hands, it's human hands, not machines. I feel very small in many ways watching a scene that's timeless, of people cultivating and people depending on what is cultivated. It's a timeless kind of activity, and I feel I'm there as a spectator with my sketchbook to try to understand that activity and reproduce it in my way as best as possible and to share with others.
This song came to me by the grace of God somehow. It just popped into my heart and I just wrote it down. Now it's time to leave the stage, take another bow. It was my song when I wrote it. It's your song now. Your song now.
All right, and we're back. And Betty, that's an incredibly wonderful documentary about your activities, particularly where it's all local oriented with your local art based projects. And one of the things that struck me about that is the fact that you're using wood panels
Right.
in your art process, and you're having your wood panels routed, and they're basically cut and shaped to the design of each art piece. So how did you kind of come into that process?
It happened by chance earlier when I worked with an organization called Heifer International that dealt with issues of world hunger, and I traveled with them in many, many world areas sketching and did big paintings that were at the United Nations and so on, and then eventually went on exhibit all across the country, but eventually ended up in Little Rock, Arkansas at their national international headquarters. But they developed another building, one that was just an educational building, and they wanted a big mural. And they said, come, paint the mural. No, I said, no, I don't want to leave Ashland. I have a great studio. So I devised this idea from the etching plates I had done earlier, cutting and shaping zinc plates, which I did myself, to trying it with wood.
Yeah.
And Barney, because they were heavy pieces, they were 3/4 inch plywood. Barney was wonderful in terms of cutting out the design with a skill saw and then doing the routing, shallow, medium, deep. So we worked as a team together for about 20 years until very recently. We did all the airport panels and some others. But more recently I've taken over and decided I want to try it myself my own way, but I can't route. Not good at that, but I can cut with a skill saw and a bandsaw and do a lot of gluing and building up in a different way. So the Darker Dreamers and the Standing Rock panels are that way.
And so that gives your pieces a little bit more of a three-dimensional feel.
Yeah, I kind of like the solidness of like holding it. It's kind of almost like a person connection.
Right.
A little, the panel's almost like a little child there.
Yeah.
I kind of like it.
Well, it really makes your pieces stand out, particularly when you're in a big exhibition and your pieces is mounted to just your typical gallery white wall. I mean, your coloration, because you're doing lots of extremely bold colors, and you just can't help but be drawn in to your art the way you
Good.
So that's really kind of cool. We do have a few pieces that represent some of your local themed work. So if the control room could bring up the harvest, so let's talk a little bit about some of these
Sure.
Images. So let's go on to the next one in the sequence here. So these are like this is from represents one of the local farmers that you.
No, this is a farm worker, and the farm is Fry Family Farm. It is a local farm.
Right.
And one of the things I like to do when I'm there again and again, they get to know me, the workers get to know me, and they don't mind seeing the sketches or taking a look over my shoulder. I don't mind at all. And very often I can put the panel in the back of my Subaru when it's completed and literally bring it out to them and show them. And they love it. And very often I will have reproductions of the panel, of that piece that represents them, and I give it to them. So I have a rapport with them, but also respect for them.
Yeah. Let's go on to the next image. So tell me about these. These are continuing in that same.
Right. These are the more recent ones of 2016. That's when I had to stop doing that work, mostly because I had a knee injury and couldn't walk the distance out into the field. But by then I had done literally 75 panels.
Wow.
So 26 are in the airport, and the rest have been circulating in exhibits around Oregon and beyond.
Yeah.
And I'm just really happy that it becomes an educational experience in galleries. So here these pieces represent chopping weeds from I think it is the spinach harvest and at an early stage before the harvest, and then beets, watching the way beets are pulled from the earth and then shaken and the dirt comes off and so on. I'm just loving it. To me, it's almost like a birthing process every time I, go out and see and experience a particular crop.
Well, Betty, I mean, it's really been wonderful having you on the show, and we're going to continue talking to you for the second segment to talk more about your international travels and your international related work. So I want to tell our audience that right now we've reached the end of our show, Rogue Artisans and Crafters, and we want to thank you at home for joining us and learning about our featured artist, Betty LaDuke. We thank Betty for being our featured artist and appearing on our show to discuss her life and work. We also want to thank our crew who have made it possible to put this program together, and to thank RVTV for their wonderful studio facility, which allows us to produce shows such as this one. If you'd like to become a studio producer and create your own public access show, you can contact RVTV to learn how. You can also watch this show on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. and Thursday evenings at 11:30 p.m. on Channel 15 of the Ashland Home Network and in the rest of Southern Oregon via charter cable on Channel 182. You can also find all episodes of Rogue Artisans and Crafters at archive.org. You can also visit rvtv.sou.edu to find streaming of all of our RVTV shows. You can also follow our show on Facebook by visiting and liking our official show page. Just search for Rogue Artisans and Crafters. And please make sure and check out Betty LaDuke at her official website at bettyladuke.com, where you can get more information about her art and her life. So I'm your host, David Glamour Dave Nienow, and we will see you next time.